On Ben TV, I've actually been on the channel, yes.
Ben TV!
Part of the program today. Good program is Dialogue in Diaspora, coming to you live from Ben Television. My name is Tunde Alabi. This beautiful Monday morning, we will be taking a look at issues around the global, around the world. We'll be discussing changing global policies and national interests. It's no longer news. The key important countries around the world are now looking inward or talking about the interest of their nations. Britain is talking about Brexit, that everything about Britain should be for Britain first. And of course, America is talking about Donald Trump, and America is talking about America first. The European Union seems not to be able to put itself together. Things don't seem to be working too well. Donald Trump issuing out different kinds of policies affecting global politics and of course international relations, and the world seems not to be too eager and happy with some of the policies Donald Trump is coming up with, and of course the European Union is also very unhappy with Britain. On the program today, particularly look at our changing world. What has happened to globalization? How is the current political trend impacting on both national and international politics? Of course, if you take a look at France, rising political parties now talking about France being on its own, and then the world doesn't seem to get to know what is happening again. Well, maybe the fear of ISIS, terrorism, we don't know, but I've got two important gentlemen in the house. These are politicians. These are people that are doing very well in the United Kingdom, are contributing to UK politics and national interests at different levels. Permit me first to introduce to you Zach Polanski. Zach, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
Zach was a one-time candidate under the Liberal Democrat for the London Assembly. Thank you for joining us on the program today, Zach. And also we've got Michael Shitu. That name sounds very familiar. We all remember Shitu Sodok. Of course, yes, we have Michael Shitu joining us on the program today. He is a councillor under the Labour Party at Sodok. Michael, thank you for being part of the program today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure having you on the show. Gentlemen, let me start with you, Zach. What are your thoughts about the changing trend in global politics?
I think that's a big question. I think there's lots of big things going on at the moment. The obvious place to start, I guess, is Trump in America and the danger that we're turning into 1930s Germany. The rise of fascism is literally on the march. I don't think that can be underestimated. And I think what's parallel to that, and I don't think there's any real difference, is what's happening in Europe and the breakdown of Europe. And I think at a time when in the UK we've needed our friends and allies more than ever, we're seeing Theresa May looking increasingly desperate, trying to scrabble for deals with Donald Trump, and when she should be challenging him, she's holding his hand. So I think there's a worrying trend across the whole of the world, and I don't want to be depressing first thing on a Monday morning, but I think it's looking pretty bleak out there. The only optimism right now is actually when we look at protests, or we look at whether it's in Romania or Gambia, whether there's people coming together and actually saying no, we can stand for something better than this. So
what would one actually blame Donald Trump for some of his policies in America? I mean, bearing in mind some of the things America has actually gone through in the past, the 9/11 terrorism attack, threats of terrorism against America, America's interest, America itself and Americans. And then the president has gone, look, guys, we are under serious threats. We need to protect our borders. We need to protect our country. Let's talk about America first. Let's protect our interests before we start protecting other people's interests. Would that be something too much for a president to ask?
So look, I think we should take the threat of terrorism really seriously, and it's not something you can just brush off. But there's two things there. One, the terrorists were never from these countries. They were actually homegrown Americans most of the time. So I think there's an issue there about radicalization and looking at the education system. And why are so many working class young ethnic minorities being dismissed? Obviously, they're not all turning to terrorists. It's a tiny, tiny minority. but what is going on there? And I'd suspect that some of what's going on there is America's foreign policy, and also the fact that, you know, when you have a president who's making laws and policies that seem so discriminatory against your people or your community, then of course that breeds resentment. Secondly, he's not made a lot of policies yet because he's only been president a couple of weeks, although the executive orders he has issued, you know, are deeply worrying. But part of it is just about rhetoric, and I don't think we should underestimate the danger of words and the danger of narrative. And Trump, you know, from the moment that he was in office, in fact, even before the inauguration, the tweets, the interviews, the strange, bizarre behaviour has been nothing but racist, divisive, misogynistic, homophobic, every little kind of word that you can think of to describe a negative behaviour pretty much is applied to President Trump at this point.
That's also some very strong word. Michael, I mean, let's take on Zach on those adjectives he used in describing Donald Trump. These were the things Donald Trump campaigned on prior to his being elected, and he got the vote. He was elected the president of the United States of America. Will those adjectives still apply to him?
I mean, I think the very few days he spent in power at the moment, he's made it quite clear that there's no other way to describe him but those adjectives in question. I think what Donald Trump is feeding on is the fears of Americans who are worried about the fact that globalization isn't working for them and the economy isn't delivering for them in America.
America seems to be the promoters. In fact, globalization started with America.
You're absolutely right. The West economy, not just America, but if you think about UK, if you think about most European countries, their economy and their powerhouse was built on the back of globalization, which is manufacturing in this country and then exporting to developing countries. So if you say, for example, Nigeria imports quite a lot of its product and resources, and places like America grew on the back of globalization, being able to produce, manufacture, and exporting it somewhere else. When the table is now turning, whereby actually other countries would be the manufacturers and they could be the consumer, then they start to see an issue. I think there isn't an issue in itself with globalization. I think the key issue is failure of successive government in various countries, not just in America, but here as well, and in other European countries, to properly prepare to ensure that actually their residents are best placed to compete for the jobs, best equipped and skills to take up work, and have the adequate resources in terms of housing, education, in order to sustain the growth in essence.
The ills of Brexit, I know your constituency voted massively to remain in the UK. You're from Southwark.
And I'm very proud of that.
To remain in the EU. And I'm sure your MP also must be a very strong supporter of the EU. But as things are turning out, do you have any fears, and what are your fears?
So I was a very strong campaigner for remaining in the EU, and the reason why I did that is because I felt, and I still feel, that we're stronger together. With our common endeavor, we can achieve more than if we do alone. We've all talked about figures being bandied around about our trading relationship with European countries and about our similarities and what we have in common. I fear at the moment that with Britain leaving the EU, we risk limiting the opportunities for our future generations, our young people. We risk big businesses and corporations, and they may not do it immediately. They may want to see how things settle in, but eventually, when they see that it's probably more expensive for them to be located here, they may start to choose moving their headquarters and moving their core of production and location to other European countries. Some have touted that they may be prepared to move to Ireland, being it's probably the most similar country to the UK, but others will choose other country. And what does that mean for the average boy or girl in Peckham? An average boy or girl in Peckham at the moment, if they dream that they want to be the top investment banker, they can do that in London, in the world. If they dream of being the top investment banker, they don't need to go to New York, they don't need to go to Paris, they don't need to go anywhere. In the future, they may have to leave the UK in order to achieve their dream. If you think about the best computer science individual, they may have to leave the UK in order to achieve their dream. That is not a country which I want to create, which I want to foster for those, for my future generation. And I think we really need to be careful on how we negotiate our position with the European Union at the moment in terms of what the exit deal is. I think we're at a point of no return. I'm not subscribing to the view that we should try to stop Brexit. I think if we don't respect democracy, we have nothing. But what we must make sure we do is that we get the best out of our current negotiation position, and I continue to employ Theresa May to speak as widely to ensure that we protect as much as possible our ability to continue to trade with the UK, because if we can protect that, that would ensure that we keep jobs in the UK and we continue to make UK the best place to work for our residents.
The Prime Minister said, look, let's open up Britain to the world. And we do know that there are quite a lot of bureaucracies that surrounded the European Union. Won't show any. You can't actually foster any kind of serious economic partnership without it being sanctioned in the EU by members itself. And Theresa May said, look, we are opening our country, we are opening up Britain to the rest of the world. Global opportunities. Is there anything wrong in that?
Yeah, I think Michael spoke very eloquently about all the good reasons for remaining in the European Union, and I'd certainly consider myself pro-European. And look, I was on the show a couple of years ago during the last election, in fact, making very strong arguments, I felt strong arguments for the European Union. There was a problem that Africa in particular were being left out by the European Union. So if you have this close block of allies that are close to us, it does discriminate against other countries. I think the rules of the game have changed though, and I think the narrative's changed. And I think if anyone thinks that, Theresa May, her first port of call is going to be Africa or other countries to build strong internationalist arrangements, I think they're very misguided. So I do understand the argument that leaving the EU leaves us with a big opportunity now to look completely differently at how do we trade with other countries, how can we be more internationalist. But that's not the language coming from the Conservative Party. They're moving increasingly towards UKIP's language, which is that of protectionism, that of isolationism, and that of, small-minded little Britain, really. So I agree with the theory and philosophy that leaving the European Union could be a fantastic opportunity. I don't have any hope whatsoever that that's the direction we're heading in. I think Michael makes a very good point that we are at the point of no return, but I don't think when you speak to people who voted leave that they all voted for the same reason. So I think there's a very strong argument for another referendum on the terms of the deal, and including on that referendum there should be the option to stay. So that's not disregarding democracy, that's saying now that you know exactly what Brexit looks like, do you still agree with this decision? And I think that conversation needs to happen, because the idea that people voted to leave the single market when Nigel Farage was talking quite a lot about a Norway deal which includes the single market shows that it's not to say people are ignorant, but just the rhetoric and the discussion that was happening around the referendum was confusing and deliberately opaque, whichever side of the argument you're on.
Now, looking at the fact that the court has deferred the right to trigger Article 50 to the Parliament, of course that has been done. The Parliament giving Theresa May the right to trigger Article 50. If you were to be advising, members of Parliament, say from either of the parties, whichever party, say for instance the Liberal Democrat, what would you be telling them now that the Parliament has given Theresa May the privilege to trigger Article 50, although we're still looking at the white paper, what it does say, but what will you be telling MPs on ground to look out for, to execute or implement, or block or ask for amendment?
At the risk of sounding tribal, because it's not been all of them, there's been some fantastic Labour MPs, but this is, I'm not taking a pop at Michael, I think Labour need to step up here. So for anything to happen, there's going to have to be unity, and I feel that a majority of the Labour Party, particularly Jeremy Corbyn, have just rolled over and allowed this to happen. So actually I think if you're an MP, what you need to be doing right now, as you should be doing at any time, but particularly now, is building alliances, putting party differences aside, putting tribalism aside, and saying actually what's more important right now than, you know, the next council election or even the next national election. What's more important right now is making sure that, you know, we have a united Britain that's tolerant and open. And actually, I think you do that by working with people. And I just worry that, you know, at a time when we need to be working together, it seems that Labour have kind of ditched the title of official opposition whatsoever. The other parties are floundering with their own internal differences. And Theresa May, who should be absolutely, you know, in dire water at the moment, is swimming along as if everything's okay, although I imagine she's a swan and she's paddling furiously underneath. But it bothers me a lot that she's not being challenged at the moment.
Would you agree that?
I agree with Zach in the respect that unity is important in ensuring that we scrutinise
what about the
government.
That Labour is not really strong?
I'll get onto that. I'll get onto that. It's really important in order for us to ensure that we get the best deal. I don't agree with Zach in respect of Labour not being at the forefront of actually raising the issue. If
Michael, but that's no secret that Labour is not united over that.
No, I mean, every party has its differences, and every party has different aspects it struggles with. Certainly, many members and many parts of the party are united behind Jeremy Corbyn. And if Zach will remember...
Confident about that? Are you sure about that?
Yeah, no, I'm confident about that. If Zach would remember quite well, actually, it was Keir Starmer, who is Labour's shadow Secretary of State for Brexit, that set the stall by putting 101 questions that we ought to be asking the government in terms of its Brexit negotiation, not the Lib Dem, nor any other party. So the thought that Labour isn't doing anything or Labour isn't putting it away.
It's not that Labour is not doing enough, but the fact is Labour is divided over national issues. That they should rally around behind one another, and in the interest of Britain and the voiceless, execute a coordinated project, but it seems to be divided.
I accept that.
That's the one factor here.
I mean, I accept that there is a huge tax ahead now, and Labour needs to raise its game in order to try and sort of be a strong advocate for those who do want the good things about the European Union. And I think we're on that route. And I agree, as I said, I agree with Zach that we need to look at how where there are room for us to work with other parties to ensure that we do have a common voice on some of those key issues. I think that it's in the best interest of residents in Britain if we have a continuing strong trading relationship with the European Union. And I think we've got to try and either protect that or recreate that in another form. And so there are key red lines for me, which I think certainly I will be asking Theresa May to consider. The Labour Party nationally continues to have that dialogue, and I'm sure Parliament would want to have a strong say as well towards the end of the negotiation in terms of whether we have the right deal or not.
Zach, let's stay a little bit on Labour for now. You did put to them that Labour is a bit not coordinated, but if you look at the position Labour finds itself, it seems to be nationally divided, not even only about. There are constituencies where they voted strongly to remain in the EU, and there are places where they voted strongly to leave the EU, and they all have their MP. So it's in itself, nationally, Labour seems to find itself sitting on a divided pole. What do you think Jeremy Corbyn is having a very huge task?
It's
because, of course, he will require to manage people who voted to leave and people who voted to remain.
I think it's an absolutely huge task.
Unlike Lib Dem.
Indeed. So I think there's two things there. One on Keir Starmer, who I know pretty well because I stood against him as a spokesperson for several debates during the last election. And we stood there on a very pro-European platform when we argued about lots of things, but actually the one thing we never argued about was Europe. The idea he would then vote to trigger Article 50, as he did last week, is appalling to me. So it's not me questioning his intentions as a man. He's a principled, kind of well-intentioned man. I just wonder what's changed since those debates. And I think what's changed is Jeremy Corbyn's three-line whip. Again, I'm not here to bash Jeremy Corbyn. I actually think that if some of the values Jeremy Corbyn stood for were more across the British political scene, we'd be in a much better place. I do think, though, on Brexit, there just seems to be and there always has been since the referendum. We know he was Eurosceptic, and I don't believe he went through some kind of transformation to suddenly love the European Union. So I think he's always been a little bit weak on Europe. I think where you have a constituency, where you have an MP who believes that to remain is the right thing to do for the country, but their constituents want to leave, I think you can still be a Democrat and make the argument to your constituents. I think you need to be calm about it, and I think you need to make sure that you're not calling people stupid or ignorant, that you're really having an education piece. So you're speaking to people about what it is that makes Britain better in the European Union. There was an absolutely incredible scene last week in Parliament where you had MPs saying that they were voting to trigger Article 50 and saying it was the most catastrophic decision they've ever made. That, as someone who isn't in Parliament, is absolutely mind-blowing to me. How can you, with good conscience, know that you're voting for something that is going to disenfranchise and disempower your own constituents? It's at odds with everything that being a representative is. So I think, if I was to give advice for Jeremy Corbyn, not that he's asking for it, is to take a step back, put politics aside, put this narrative aside, and start to do the right thing for the country. I think, for instance, if you look at someone like Clive Lewis, who stands beneath Jeremy, and he's been an ally of Jeremy. For me, he shares a lot of Jeremy's values that I admire. And he's pro-European. He's been an ex-soldier, so no one would, be hitting kind of any left-wing hippie kind of rhetoric at him. And I think, the wisest thing Jeremy Corbyn could do actually is step aside and let Clive lead. But unfortunately, Jeremy's not knocking on my door for advice.
Zach made a point there in terms of actually how do you sort of grapple with the fact that you may hold, as an elected politician, you may hold one view, and those you represent hold an alternative view. My view is that at the heart of democracy as a representative is that you represent the view of your people. You have one bite at the cherry at the initial stage where you have the opportunity to persuade your residents. But if you fail at the task of doing so, then it's incumbent upon you to represent their view. If you've taken the opportunity, as we did, we had a huge debate before the referendum itself in terms of the pros and cons of Brexit, and I'm sure Zach had the opportunity to speak to many residents across the whole of the country. But if residents say, I hear you, but I disagree with you, then who are we as representative to then overturn that? I think there are situations where you can take alternative views, but I think in this situation, I think members of the public across the whole of the country have been very clear in terms of their position. And if an MP represents an area which has been very clear in terms of its position that they want to remain, then I can understand why some Labour MPs decided to vote against triggering Article 50. Conversely, I can also understand why some Labour MPs who may believe in remaining within the European Union, but their residents having made a case to them already, have already said that they don't want to remain, that they felt that it is their duty and their role to reflect that in the vote in Parliament. Now, obviously, that poses a balancing difficulty for Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the opposition party in terms of how he addresses that and in terms of the vote itself. He's chosen the way and the approach in which he's done. And I think if you look back at history, you will find a lot of similar situations in which other party leaders have taken similar situation when faced with very difficult decisions like this. Majority of Labour MPs voted in line with the Labour position. Those that decided not to voted in line with what their constituents have said at the referendum. And I'm not so sure we can criticize that at all.
Okay, now, if you take every single Wednesday you look at the Prime Minister questions time, it does seem like the Prime Minister actually is taking a battle to the Labour Party, to the opposition, rather than the opposition taking a battle to the government.
Sorry, repeat that.
Every single Prime Minister question time, you see the Prime Minister taking the battle to the Labour Party. They seem to be winning the oratory. They seems to be gaining ground, and the Labour Party, in terms of his position, rather than pushing the battle to the government, that seems to be losing losing grounds almost every week in terms of how they position themselves, policy, and coordination.
I mean,
Are we likely to see a situation where a Labour Party government is going to be at any time come up at all?
I mean, I disagree with you there that Labour isn't taking the fight to the Conservative government. Labour have been very clear in a number of Prime Minister question times, raising key issues such as housing, raising key issues such as mental health illness amongst lots of people in Britain, raising key issues such as welfare cuts. And without Labour raising this issue, I'm not so sure they would have been discussed with the same ferocity as it has been discussed in Parliament. Look, I accept that Labour are not where it needs to be at the moment in terms of our ability to win the next general election. I accept that there are a lot of grounds for us to make up, and I accept that opinion polls are not in favour of us at the moment. But I also accept that a day in politics can be a long time. I also accept that things can change pretty quickly. And I also know, and as we have all known with the way politics have turned out over the last 1 year, who would have predicted a Theresa May leadership of the Conservative Party?
Who would have predicted Donald Trump?
Who would have predicted Donald Trump? There's so much who would have predicted. Who would have predicted Boris in the role in which he currently undertakes? There's so much unpredictability that even if you are not a key proponent or a key supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, you've got to but admit that he could be right. You've got to but admit that it could turn out that Jeremy Corbyn's approach is actually what the members of the public need. And that hasn't been tested at an election. Until it has been tested at an election, then we are all just making guesses. We are all just sort of extrapolating our opinions and analysis. And opinion polls have been wrong. We could be wrong.
Zach, let's come back to how global politics is actually affecting global views of how leaders around the world perceive development. If we were to look at the way Donald Trump is going, this come under serious criticism. How do you look at Britain being able to stand up for itself along America, with America, say for instance, successfully as the EU partnership with America? Do you see that? Is it going to work? Do you see Prime Minister Theresa May working very well in the interest of Britain with Donald Trump in America?
Yeah, so I think Michael's
economically and socially.
I think Michael's right. You can't predict things at the moment. So, for those of us who were convinced that Boris Johnson was going to be Prime Minister and we're going to remain in the European Union, we've clearly been very wrong. And I think I feel the same thing with the answer I'm about to give you, that I think the best thing Theresa May could do right now is distance herself from Donald Trump. So,
is that possible?
Well, it's very difficult because we've had such a, in quote, special relationship with America. But I think ultimately, and I think this is going to be the question of the year, or at least the beginning of the year, when trade comes against your morals and your principles, where do you go and how do you go? Now, it's very easy for me to sit here, and I mean this strongly, is for me it would be morals and principles every time. So sure, our economy might take a hit. People might struggle, and some people are already very struggling. So I don't want to come from a privileged kind of background with that answer and say it's okay for people to struggle, because it's clearly not. But I think the alternative is very grim and bleak, and I think everyone suffers that way anyway. So I think it's absolutely incumbent on Theresa May at the moment to let Donald Trump and his administration know that sure, we're there to talk. He's a US head of state, and we have to accept that he has been diplomatically, and democratically, elected. And we can't disregard that and just not talk to him or not do deals with him. I'm a Democrat. I believe in that conversation. But ultimately, rather than cozying up to him and without insulting him, you need to make it very clear that those are America's policies, and the UK do not stand by those policies. I also think you need to be doing that with Saudi Arabia and various other countries that we've been doing arms deals with for decades. And it's outrageous what's going on in the government right now. You look at someone like Liam Fox, for instance, who has been absolutely, under the table. Well, it's not been even under the table deals with them. It's been quite transparent deals. And actually, just there's so much going on in the world right now that I think people are missing it, or they've got other things to worry about, kind of in more of a microcosm in their local lives. But actually, when you look at the global picture, what this Conservative government have been doing with some of these countries and the human rights abuses is absolutely despicable, and we need to be distancing ourselves from it at every opportunity.
Michael, let's say a little bit with America. I mean,
Yes.
both a court and a judge in Washington actually blocked temporarily the ban, and an appeal court did. Donald Trump has gone on Twitter trying to put out his opinions very negatively on these judges. Do you think time and the office of the president will bend, amend, and change Donald Trump with time?
So far, is demonstrating that he's struggling to adjust to the role of the president and what it requires. Look, I'm really heartened by the fact that the judiciary in America is standing up to the excessive abuse of the executive power, particularly in Donald Trump's orders. And I hope that the judiciary feel that they can continue to do that, because there will come a time where there may be at loggerheads between the executive branch of government and the judiciary. And of course, there's the legislature there. I hope that with time, that he does realize that the way he's doing politics isn't that it's not the best way of doing it, but it's plainly wrong. It's divisive, it sets America backward, and it marginalizes people, Americans, but also people around the world. And also because I think for Donald Trump, what he understands is money. He's a businessman. He's spent all his life making money. And unless he starts to realize that actually some of his policies would actually hurt Americans' dollars and Americans' bottom pocket, I think he will fail to understand
What does
that.
policy do?
So
What
for
does
example,
policy do?
For example, I'll show you this. He's been saying his economics policy has been based on sort of hiring Americans and providing jobs in Americans and
then we
building
treat
Americans'
you
growth.
as other countries
But
the
the-
way you treat
but
us
the-
as an American.
Yes, but
That's fair enough,
But the
isn't
problem
it?
is that's all okay. The problem is social policies and other policies. If it starts to alienate majority of countries around the world, as it is not in good terms with the Mexican government. We read of the Australia situation, and I'm sure there are a number of other situations which we don't even hear about. If he alienates them, the problem is America will start to have very, very limited number of countries it can export to. And Donald Trump's economic model is based on America being the powerhouse of manufacturing again that will provide the job to his residents. They need somewhere to export that to. America cannot consume all the manufacturing capacity which Donald Trump is hoping to build up. My fear is that at some point it will all blow up on his face. It will realize that his protectionist policy will may be mirrored by other countries, and if it is mirrored by other countries, American manufactured goods may not be as appealable to buy. And even if they decide that they do want to trade with America, it may just not make the financial and economic sense to do so.
Michael, can we just look at some of his positions? Look, we have these American drug barons coming into America, criminals, gangs, all coming to America, hurting Americans. And so I want to build a wall. I want to stop criminals coming into America from Mexico. One, for me to say, look, you guys are not playing your role. You're putting the whole financial burden on America because you're not paying your dues. America is taking a huge responsibility. Now, do what you ought to do, and America will play a role. If you don't, we will not. What is wrong in that?
I mean, the reality is America is built on the back of minority working hard, immigrating into the country and doing the very menial jobs that a lot of others or established Americans may have not been prepared to do. My view is that policies like building a wall hurts the wrong people. It doesn't hurt the criminals. The criminals will find ways of getting either by sea, by air, tunneling under, which coincidentally is what would not stop tunneling underneath the ground, like which has been practiced for ages. What it would do, though, is literally make it difficult for those who are wanting to emigrate to America for economic reason, who have the right skills to boost job and growth in America, and those who do want to emigrate to America for security reasons as refugees or for family reasons that want to join their family. And we've seen what his current order has done. It's teared family apart. There were people who were stranded in American airports. There were people who were stranded in their own countries who had been granted proper visa to come to America. And those kind of policies, they tend to achieve the wrong game. They tend to target vulnerable people rather than the real people who I believe Donald Trump wanted to target, or who he says he wants to target.
I think that, I ultimately want an open-hearted, generous country, and I think that ultimately Americans want that too. I think this is a very old tactic of creating a bogeyman, so creating a problem that isn't there. And actually, when you look at all the statistics, the problems of, if you take Mexican migration, for instance, and look at the illegal immigration compared to the legal immigration and what that's benefiting to the country, then I absolutely agree with Michael. And I think it's very easy to make a pro-refugee, pro-immigrant, pro-even illegal immigrant argument, although, of course, you want illegal immigrants to become legal immigrants so they're paying tax. I think ultimately it comes down to this. What's the real problem here? Is it bankers that, were taking ridiculous bonuses and playing around with the financial system and haven't paid for the billions of pounds and billions of dollars that, they screwed the country over? Is it about tax havens or the Panama Papers? Is it about people not paying their fair share of tax? Or are we going to blame a few migrants who scrabbled over into a country because they have absolutely nothing and wanted to make a better life for themselves? I think the real blame here, though, is actually, and I don't include Michael in this category, is with politicians. For years now, they've played with the public, with this rhetoric, with this idea of really making an enemy, because it's so much easier when you point at a group that are vulnerable, that are voiceless and can't speak for themselves, actually taking on and giving truth to power. And I think it's time that politicians, really buckle down. And, some of them are doing this, so I'm not across all parties. But still, some in the Labour Party, but particularly in the Conservative Party and UKIP, find it so easy to blame an immigrant. And when I say the Labour Party, I'm talking about the mugs, for instance, at the election that said, we'll control migration and things like that. I can understand people's fears. It's not to dismiss that. I understand that if you're living on a council estate, for instance, and you're finding it difficult to get a good school place for your kid, or rent is too high, or you're on a NHS waiting list, and some powerful person in power says, look, there's something to blame. I can understand why that's an attractive argument. But I think it's really important that we all keep a cool head, that we keep talking to people.
If Donald Trump says NATO member countries pay your dues, then we will play our part. Anything wrong with that? I mean, it's clear that most NATO member countries are not paying the required contributions into NATO costs. And the huge bulk of this is being taken by America. And Donald Trump said, this is unfair on America. Everybody has got to play their own role.
Yeah, I mean, we've experienced probably the largest period of peace in post-war era in the West, precisely because actually countries like America are playing a leading role, a leadership role in the world in ensuring that they support institutions like NATO to maintain peace in a region. Look, I agree with you that the ideal situation is that every member of a body pays equally to that body itself. But also, we've also got to bear in mind countries' situations and their means, and we've also got to reflect that.
I mean, it's an agreement that you pay the 10% of your national budget into NATO pubs, but most countries are not even doing that.
No, I mean, I agree with you that countries need to look within themselves and see how they can pay greater than what they are doing at the moment, certainly right up to the 2%. But for me, I think for countries who are not in a position to pay the 2%, that isn't an excuse for America to throw down its toys and say, for these reasons, we're not going to be part of the coalition anymore, and we're not going to play the leading role and maintaining the world peace in which we're having at the moment. Because let's be quite frank, the reason why things are as peaceful as it is because people understands the consequences of acting with aggression or perhaps acting rashly or acting arbitrarily. When that peers away, when certain countries believe that perhaps there isn't the balance there to counteract their power, then we can find ourselves pretty much quickly in a position where we found ourselves pre the war era.
All right, fantastic. I've been talking with Zach Polanski and Michael Shitu. We're going to a very short break. When we return, we will quickly take a look at what is happening in Ukraine. The fight in Ukraine over last week, it became one of the toughest and dangerously fought battle in the eastern Ukraine. The role of Russia has come under a huge criticism. And we look at now Donald Trump seems to be taking it lightly and easy. It tends to be a very good friend. He is looking to be a friend of Mr. Putin, of America, of Russia, and of course, if America under Donald Trump seems to be getting on the side of Putin, where does the world stand, either in the battle in Syria or in that of Ukraine or any other part of the world where Russia may have some very serious interest? These issues will be taken on with my guest Zach and of course Michael when we come back from this break. Don't get away, and of course open the phone line for you to join the discussion. We're going to short break now.
At livestream@bentelevision.com or call us on 020-8808-8800. Ben TV, Sky 182, bridging the gap.
So if the workers must eat and caterers go there to cook, what happens? They will buy the food, the caterer will pay school fees. You see how the economy works? When you pay the worker a salary, he or she will go and pay school fees for the child. The owner of the school will in turn buy food and do other things. So it's an appeal that at this point we need to be able to get our National Assembly to help us approve the borrowing plan so that we can have money to employ our citizens along the line. When that is completed, the next phase of the railway will be from Ibadan to either Minna or to Ilorin. Currently, we are also looking for loan to do Kano to Kaduna for that standard gauge rail line. Now, this is as it affects North Central. The next thing that is topical that may interest you will be the Abuja airport, right? And it's a common story, it's everywhere. We are saying the Abuja airport was built for 20 years. It has lasted for 34 years. It is extremely dangerous to people. We need to close it. We need to rebuild, reconstruct. I didn't say repair. I didn't say rehabilitate. I didn't say this. I said rebuild. The foundation is almost gone. We need to reconstruct it. And what we are asking for is patience. Because if anything happens tomorrow, like I said the last time, don't ask Minister for Transportation to resign. I will not resign. Because I've done my duty, haven't I? The duty of alerting the country that it is dangerous and we're ready to rebuild it. And you're saying, no, don't rebuild, don't close it. If we don't close it, what do? We'll be exposing lives. And one of the constitutional responsibility of the president is to protect lives and what? Properties. So you can't deny that responsibility. It's our responsibility. We believe that if we close it by March 8th, in 6 weeks we should be able to reopen it. And we think, we know it is challenging to our economy. We think that we'll keep to that 6 weeks. What else that have I not told you? No, I'm not in charge of roads. Don't call me. I'm not Minister for Works. When the Minister for Works comes, he can tell you. I think I have told you enough for this North Central, and I wish you God's blessings. Thank you.
Was the Honorable Minister of Transportation, Right Honorable Rotimi Amechi, pleading with Nigerians to continue to have confidence in the government, and that government already understands the complaints of the people and the challenges they are facing, and asks for patience and understanding. However, he went further to highlight some of the plans of his ministry and some of the things they have achieved, and that most of the modest achievements in North Central, include the Baru River Port to be commissioned in the first quarter of next year, and it has been already, work has already started on it. He also mentioned the issue of the Central Railway line, which is going to be from Itakwe to Warri, that the contractors are back to site on this 32-year-old project. He spoke about the Narrow Gauge Railway line, which is going to start from Lagos and we end at Kaura Namoda via Abeokuta, Ibadan, Ilorin, and others. And he also emphasized that some of these special targets will create employment for Nigerians, and most importantly, the Abuja airport closure, which is going to be for 6 weeks, and ask for patience from Nigerians.
What you want to tell us so that we go and resolve it. So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open, but before I get down to the audience, we have already received questions from the social media for the honorable ministers. And I will start with the question I have just received for the Minister of Transport. Honorable Minister, sir, how soon do you think this administration would link up Abuja with rail lines and to other cities in the Federation? And can you tell us your story about the Abuja-Kaduna rail line? Again, Honorable Minister of Transportation, this one is coming from one Mr. Pajok Dung from Haipang around Jos area. He said, the Jos Inland
the local events. Just send us an email for more information at livestream@bentelevision.com or call us on 020-8808-8800. Ben TV, Sky 182, Bridging the Gap.
Welcome back, and thank you for staying tuned, and thank you for joining us. The phone line is open. You can join us and wherever you are in the world and be part of the program. Now, let's quickly take a look at what is happening as part of our discussion on the changing global politics and national interests. Let's look at what is going on in Eastern Ukraine. Zach, over the weekend, the war in Eastern Ukraine got to its peak with people being shelled, a key ally of the Russian army killed, things happening, national grid in Eastern Ukraine being knocked out, people in a freezing condition. What are your thoughts? What do you think is going on, and the role of Putin in all this?
I mean, it's horrendous, and I think President Putin is absolutely at the heart of all of this.
But he's denied. Russia said it's got nothing to do with what is happening in Eastern Ukraine.
I think, I'm not going to say if they're directly complicit or indirectly complicit, but it's clear that in terms of what's happening in the world right now is playing into Putin's hands in every single part of the conversation we've had so far. So Brexit was something, that he was absolutely dying to happen. It only strengthens Putin's hand if we have a weakened Europe, and never in my lifetime, certainly, have we had a Europe that's looking so weak. And with the rise of Le Pen and various other things going on in Europe at the moment, it doesn't look like we're becoming unified anytime soon. On top of that, there's the allegations of Russia interfering with the American election. Again, I don't know how verified those reports are, but it's certainly true that Putin and Trump come off the same shelf. And, you know, in terms of they're very happy to have that kind of protectionist, very hyper-masculine alpha male outlook on world leadership. And I think, you know, again, without resorting to hyperbole and without depressing people, it really does feel like we're on the brink in a way that I can't, again, remember in my lifetime of a serious conflict. How serious that conflict is, or what exactly is going to happen, or how global it is, I'm not a world expert or a historian, so I wouldn't make predictions about that. All I will say is, you know, not even as a politician, but just as a citizen, it's deeply worrying. In fact, it's terrifying. You look at what's happening in the world and what's happening with Putin, and I just don't see where this ends. To give a more hopeful answer, I hope that this ends with people saying, okay, enough is enough, and actually it's time for us to unite and not divide, and start to look at a better way that the world could be run, including looking at our political systems around the world. How can we represent people's voices more effectively? How can we look at people who are struggling and start to recognise that they've been neglected for so long? The rise of, you know, neoliberalism, how we've allowed the status quo to be maintained. I was a huge fan of Bernie Sanders, and I think that there's some things about Trump that shouldn't be rejected and actually are positive. I don't think those are from his personality traits, but actually some of the things that he's looking around, for instance, his inauguration speech, the first kind of 5-10 minutes of it, if they weren't coming from President Trump, were quite inspiring. He was saying, actually, this wasn't a victory for the politician, this was a victory for you, the people. Now, I'm not going to celebrate that, because when he's saying you, the people, he was talking about some deeply divisive rhetoric. But what I can applaud is the idea that actually that people are going to have more power. And, you know, in some ways, I think we're in a revolution, and it might not be until later, looking back, that we realise the revolution had already started before we were even having this conversation. And it's just about, where does it end?
Michael, do you see a revolution? I mean, this is what I'm trying to say. Since the end of the Second World War, the world has been on, America and Russia had been on this Cold War thing. Even at the United Nations Security, they never agree. But here now, we seems to be having a kind of a precedent that is taking America to be on the same page with Russia, so ultimately bringing to a halt a Cold War. If we do have Russia and America agreeing on national or international issues, wouldn't that be good for the world?
I think what is good for the world is if there is a balance of power across all regions, so that there isn't just a US, there isn't just there isn't just Russia, there is China, there is European Union, there is the African Union, and there are blocs around who maintain the balance of power. Indeed, look, I'm not of a type of person that subscribes to a notion that if someone is your enemy, they are always your enemy. So I think I can understand why Trump may want to review or kind of like taking assumptions, may want to think, actually, let's see whether we can redefine our relationship with Russia. I don't particularly think Putin has the right intention, and I think Trump will realize that sooner rather than later. I hope it's not later, because that will be to Americans' detriment. But I take it and I accept that there is nothing wrong in trying to review things and not just accept what you've been told in terms of what the status quo ought to be indeed. I personally would like to see a stronger European Union. As Zach has said, it's really, really important. And I think Putin's strategy is to weaken the European Union. I'd like to see a stronger African Union. I think there needs to be a stronger bloc fighting for the interest of Africa as a whole. And likewise, there has to be a stronger voice for Asian countries as well. And when you have that balance of power across the world itself, then you are likely to find a more peaceful, prosperous world.
How do you think the world is going to end the killing in eastern Ukraine? Can that come to an end anytime soon?
I think it's a very, very difficult situation, because clearly Russia have interest in what is going on in Ukraine and eastern Ukraine, and clearly either indirectly or directly they're having some kind of input into what is going on the ground. I don't know to what extent that is. whether it stops or not, to some extent, will have a large bearing on what Putin wants. I say Putin because it's been very clear that the European Union isn't prepared to do what is necessary in order to counter that balance in terms of Russia's aggression. It's also
nobody seems to want to take on Russia.
I know. It's also been very clear that, and I think it's also been very clear that the US, even under President Obama, wasn't prepared to do that, and I think.
Even in Syria, he wasn't ready to take any serious action.
Countries are looking at
involvement.
The potential costs and ramifications of getting involved, and what they may assess as the lack of strategic interest in their own interest in intervening in the area itself. And unless they have a different perspective of that, or Putin has a different perspective of what is in Russia's best interest in terms of its own activities in eastern Ukraine, the status quo will continue, and that is the most sad aspect for Ukrainians.
Okay, as we count down on the program, let's quickly finish on the ground of what is happening in Britain. Zach, as Britain stands at the moment, what does the future hold for us in terms of social mobility, the NHS, the economy, the labour market, everything?
And so I could give you a very short answer, which is the future for the UK is very bleak indeed. We're heading for a world that's deeply divided. We're heading for war, quite frankly, and it's a pretty depressing time. An alternative answer, I think, the metaphor that we're at a crossroads is used a lot in politics, but I really think it's never been so valid. I think we're at a space that if left of centre, progressives, liberals, can all come together and say, actually, we can do much better than this. The world is in turmoil, and actually this is a time now that is an opportunity that people are waking up. One positive thing about Brexit, it's a very small silver lining, is that, I've just moved to Tottenham, for instance. I can hear in cafes people are talking about politics. I don't remember a time in my life where you would just casually hear people on the street talking about politics so much. I think it's about fueling that national conversation and actually saying, let's look at an alternative. Let's look at a different way that we can fund political parties. Let's look at a different voting system so we can empower people and they can have a voice in who we elect. Let's have a look between that relationship between politicians and people. And most importantly, let's really have a conversation now about what is Britain's place in the world. When we look at conflicts like Syria, for instance, it's an incredibly messy conflict. At one point we were going to arm Assad, at one point we were going to arm the rebels, then we know that those arms probably would have fallen into the hands of ISIS. I don't think it's good enough to say we just back away from that crisis and say it's nothing to do with us. But at the same time, instinctively within me, when there's conflict and people are dying, it doesn't make sense for me to either to put more weapons and more fire into that situation. I don't have an easy answer for that, but I think that's healthy. I think it's about time we start to admit that there's not easy answers to these things. It's not about, are you in Labour, are you in the Liberal Democrats, are you in a different party? It's actually about saying this is about humanity. This is about building up relationships with people, not making enemies, and looking for better ways for the world.
Right. Before I come to Michael, let me quickly take this call. Thank you for joining us on the program this morning. Good morning. Where are you calling from? And your name? Good morning. Hello, good morning. Hello, good morning. Hello, good morning. Are you there? Hello, good morning.
Hello.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for joining us on the program
Hello,
today.
are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you very well, loud and clear. Good morning.
Right, good morning. This is Julius from London.
Julius from London. Thank you so much.
What I would like to say about what I like to say about this matter is about this American and the Russia and every China and everything is, I think in this world now, it is always good to look for more friends than to look for more enemy. To me, as far as I'm concerned. And this Donald Trump, we have very little to complain about him. If this one want to be the friends of Putin or the Russians, I think he has the right. Because they have been criticizing the Americans especially, who want to appear as the mother of the world. They are the one who will fashion that one, who will fashion this one. It doesn't look any as in, after the Second World War, the U.S. is the only country that has invaded its neighbors, and they invaded Grenada, they invaded Panama, they invaded many countries. And and Russia has not done it. And why I see that well, they're always against Russia. There's little we can believe in about those people, those the Americans who are always criticizing the rest of the world. Because you could see that when they went to what they did against Iraq, Saddam Hussein, there's little we can believe in them about what they did in Libya. They are the one now. They don't want the refugees from Libya now. All those things that there's little we can believe about the Americans. And let me ask you one question. How many wars has even Americans has already won? They've never won any war. Right from Vietnam, they've been failing. They went to Vietnam, they failed. There's no war. They went to many other countries have gone. They never won any war. Why are they proud of America, the greatest in the world, the greatest in the world, in provoking other countries, sanctioning other Iran, and provoking all these things, causing trouble outside the world. So if Trump wants to be the friend of the Russians, it is time to sit down and talk, as he said.
All right,
we cannot continue to be the enemy of the rest of the world. China, everything. When they need money now, they went to China.
All right, thank you so much, sir, for being part of the broadcast. Thank you for your insighting contribution to the show. Michael, that seems to be a bit weird from our discussion and some. I hope not. Look, America has done more damage to the world, to its friends, to its neighbor, than Russia. Has invaded more countries than even Russia. Fought more wars against innocent people than Russia. And maybe it's time we looked at a different angle to all this.
Julius made a good point that you should always in life try to make more friends than an enemy. And as I said earlier on, that there is nothing wrong in reassessing your relationship with individuals and with countries and seeking to make that better. So in this respect, I have nothing against what Trump is at least on the face value trying to do with Russia.
Face value.
I must say that I do not accept that America has been more of a harm than good across the world. I think on the balance, Americans' leadership across the world over the last a few decades has been positive and has been the right one in maintaining.
It started the issue
just let me
Libya,
finish. In terms of, I'll get onto that. In terms of maintaining what peace and fostering prosperity. Now, I accept that America hasn't got it all right. I think you can point to a number of situations were pretty bad during the Bush era, with interventions in Iraq and interventions in other places. But Obama sought to repair some of those. Zach made a very good point earlier on that what you mustn't do because of your fear of making a mistake is to not do anything at all. Because actually that is the worst option. I think when you see human suffering across the face of the planet, I think you ought to ask yourself, can I make this situation better? And if you can make the situation better, then you ought to consider one form of intervention or the other. Intervention could be as simple as supporting those who are on the ground to make their case. Intervention could be as active as actually providing ground support. But I do not accept the notion that actually America has been more dangerous than Russia. A lot of the things Russia do are not the things that is prepared to accept, but which a lot of people know that it originates from Russia itself. And that is the most dangerous country that which you can, if someone operates behind the line, below the line, and it's very difficult to pin it to any particular act, then it makes it more dangerous than perhaps if you're able to hold someone accountable, as many people have been able to hold U.S. accountable in terms of its actions across the decades indeed.
Zach?
I think America's got a lot to answer for. So I don't think it's a helpful discussion necessarily to say have they been better or worse than other countries, but I do think that for a long time they've been given a free ticket to ravage around the world, causing problems, often for oil, money, or influence. I agree President Obama was definitely a step in the right direction.
So if for the first time we're saying, look, we don't want to do this again, We want to make friends. We don't want to invade any country. We want to settle scores with our friends or with our perceived enemies. And if Trump is saying, look, I want to open arms to everybody, let me reach out to Russia. Let's see what we can do to make the world better.
Without getting too spiritual about it, I think that'd be fantastic. I think that
spiritual indeed.
we should be connecting with people. However, I think if I was an American citizen, I'd want President Trump to make it clear to Putin that we're willing to be friends. But with that, we can't accept misogynistic, racist, homophobic kind of policies. And actually, if we're going to be friends with people, we have to share similar values. While we're not sharing those similar values, I think it's great to have conversations. I think Michael put it brilliantly earlier when he said, make more friends than enemies. Who can't agree with that. So I think we need to be cautious with America. I think we need to maintain that relationship
with
as
Russia,
much as possible. Well, with Russia, I think same as America, we need to be a critical friend. So ultimately, there's no point in taking an offensive position just for the sake of it. But I also think without being insulting, when you disagree with someone, you need to put that very strongly. My fear is I don't think Theresa May has that in her. I don't think it's a lack of character necessarily. I think she's probably a very strong woman outside of the political arena. But as far as politics is concerned, she seems absolutely attuned to just doing the right political thing as opposed to the right thing for humanity, the right thing for the country. And that's a big problem.
Before the call came in, we were talking about what does the future holds for Britain.
I see myself as a very much an optimistic person, and I would like to hope that, I would like to believe that this would be a good opportunity for us to redefine ourselves in a way perhaps which we haven't done for a long time, and for us to set a course that would maintain at the least our economic prosperity and would offer real opportunity for the marginalized in society. We are an unequal society. And I think actually this may really offer us a good opportunity to try to address that. And if anything good of that nature comes out of it, then of course I can start smiling. Would it happen? As I said earlier on, I think there are huge danger in maintaining our economic prosperity, being outside of the EU than being inside the EU. I think trade negotiations are going to take years and years and years. They're not something you can just click your fingers and do within a year. And I think those periods of time would mean that potentially Britain may fall behind in some of the progress in which it has made over the last few decades. So I want to be optimistic, but I haven't been given any reason to be optimistic by the current government.
How early do you think Labour Party will ever be in number 10 and 11?
I accept that the opinion polls are not looking good for us at the moment. But as I said earlier on, a lot can change pretty quickly, pretty fast. I think you only need one particular huge political event that could particularly show or demonstrate what Labour under Jeremy Corbyn have been saying all along. And if that happens, that could reach out to the right audience and to members of the public across the country in terms of what Jeremy Corbyn's ideas and approach are. I don't think winning in 2020 is out of our grasp at all. I think it is still a realistic prospect. It's certainly one which I will continue to work hard for, and with many of my colleagues across the country will continue to show why Labour in government is the best for the country.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you for being part of the program. Zach Polanski, pleasure having you on the show again.
Thank you again.
We've missed you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming back again. Michael Shitu, it's been a pleasure to have you. I think it's my first time of having you on the show. It is. It's been a very great time with you on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for your time out with us. Right, gentlemen, look forward to having you again on the program. My name is Twenda Rabi. Thank you for being part of the program. Enjoy the rest of your day and week. Bye.